Hi guys, today we're going to talk about anatomy review, triple extension, and muscles versus movements. And with this anatomy review, a lot of this might be something that you're already familiar with. You feel like you've already mastered that subject matter. I'm not going to spend the whole day on it, but just allow yourself to get kind of familiar with it. I'm going to riff a little bit on different parts of it and why I think it's important. But do not worry about memorizing hundreds of muscles or dozens of bones or anything like that. But this stuff's important and it's going to help us build a foundation for a lot of things that we're going to talk about from here on out. And we'll go into triple extension, which is the three joints that help us create a lot of our athletic positions and why that's important. And then we're going to finish with just a little discussion on muscles versus movements. The human muscular system. So with our skeletal muscles, we've got over 600 muscles. Some charts will list it up into the 800s. For me, I kind of stick to the basics. As time goes on, through my career, I've learned a little bit more about certain subsystems, and if I'm having a lot of athletes with shoulder health issues, I learn more about maybe the rotator cuffs, or as my athletes have more hip issues, I learn a little bit more about the pelvic girdle and things like that. But again, this is more of a foundational day, and we might get into some of that later on. But for now, we're just sticking with some more of the basics. So keep in mind that our muscle fibers, we have different muscle fiber types. Type 1 would be slow twitch. And with those slow twitch muscle fibers, if you have a greater predominance of slow twitch muscle fibers, you're going to be kind of a better marathon runner. So think about like maybe the Kenyans who tend to dominate marathons. And if you've got fast twitch or type 2 muscle fibers, you might be more like a Jamaican who, for other reasons, not only their muscle fiber types, but they're excellent sprinters. And a lot of, if you look at the top sprinters in the world, a lot of them are from Jamaica. So there's type 2X, which are high force producers, but fatigue quickly. So a lot of times our best sprinters are not our best marathon runners, and vice versa. And that's not because they're lazy or they prefer one or the other, although that might be the case. But part of it has to do with their genetics and some of those muscle fibers that they're just born with. And then you've got type 2A muscle fibers, and those are going to be, they're really kind of like in the middle. And with our training and our lifestyle and what we do to our bodies, we can actually influence them to be a little bit more slow twitch or a little bit more explosive and fast twitch. So there's some adaptability there. So that's why you might see somebody who trains a lot for sprinting become powerful and explosive and quick. And then maybe they go into a different phase of their life and they start training for an entirely different sport, like perhaps marathon running. And at first they will struggle with it because of their background, but as they train, their body will actually morph and adapt and become more adept at the challenges that they're giving. Origins and insertions. With our muscles, with our skeletal muscles, we're looking at 2 points on the body where, the origin, which is typically closer to the center of the body, and the insertion, which is typically more distal from the center of the body. And so this helps us kind of visualize the line of pull. So if I haven't done a movement before, and I don't know exactly what muscle is supposed to be firing, if I kind of look at the body and some basic anatomy and I think about my origins and insertions, I can sort of guesstimate what muscles are firing or what muscles should be firing. And then just for our future conversations and a little bit of foundational knowledge again, think about your agonist and your antagonist muscles. So if I'm doing a bicep curl, my tricep on the opposite side of that joint, which is a antagonist to my bicep curl, my tricep is going to need to relax a little bit. And that's actually going to help improve the performance of the bicep curl. Contractions. Our muscles only do one thing. They only contract, they only shorten. But they have three types of contractions. They have concentric, which is the successful shortening of a muscle fiber. They have isometric, which is iso is Latin for same, and metric is Latin for length. So think about isometric means same length. And so with isometric, we're actually doing a hold, whether that's intentional or unintentional. So think about a wall squat is an intentional isometric exercise. Or think about somebody who's doing a push-up and they're on their way up and they're fighting as hard as they can, and then they kind of get stuck and they're shaking and they're holding right there. Well, they're working very hard, but even though they're not moving up or down, they are working very hard and they're performing an isometric muscle contraction. And then our third muscle contraction is the eccentric contraction. And with an eccentric contraction, the muscle is firing to shorten, but the force being produced by the muscle and the force being produced by the weight or the outside force is greater than the muscle contraction. So we might have someone performing push-ups, as many push-ups as they can, and they're being successful, and then they kind of get stuck and they fail and they kind of do a belly flop back down, and they can no longer concentrically fire the triceps and the chest and the shoulders to perform the movement that they want to move, which is a successful push-up upwards. They can no longer, because of fatigue, they can no longer complete that movement because the muscles are concentrically zapped. But what they can do next after that is they can maybe do a push-up off of the knees, or they could have a partner stand over them and pull them up by the t-shirt. And then they could do a controlled lowering of that push-up. And then they're not gonna let the concentric muscle contractions limit their ability to work. They're actually gonna tap into some of those other muscle contraction types. So your concentric is the weakest of the three, and then isometric is in the middle, and then your eccentric is the strongest, although there's a little philosophy there though, because it's the strongest, but you're actually fighting a losing battle because you're letting the muscle lengthen as it is contracted. So it's a little bit of a combination of art and science there. But those are our three muscle contractions. And as we advance as coaches with our programming, we will use all of them. I would say probably the number one thing that I see young coaches or beginners limit their training by, they're limited entirely by concentric contractions. When they can't complete traditional reps anymore, that's when the set is over. But with these isometric and eccentric contractions, we can tap into the muscles and we can dig a little bit deeper and cause more damage and more trauma, hopefully in a good way. So let's dive a little bit deeper into those muscles. So let's say we're going to take a little bit of a snapshot of that bicep muscle. And as you go from the bicep, from the muscle, if you follow that line there down to the next little image, it becomes a muscle bundle. So as you're looking inside there, it almost looks like, I always think about a box of spaghetti. So if you open up the end of a box of spaghetti, you see all those sort of noodles jammed in there. That's essentially what we're working with. And inside that muscle bundle, if you go in a little bit deeper, maybe look at a microscope on another lens. Now you get a fascicle, and you go from that fascicle to a muscle fiber, from that muscle fiber to a myofibril, and from that myofibril to a sarcomere. And that's where we're really looking at just the bare bones and the smallest form of our muscle fibers. And if you're looking on that sarcomere, if you look at our actin and our myosin, that's actually where the contractions take place. Is those super small structures in there will actually have the function down there, and that's what creates maybe that bicep curl right there. Looking a little bit deeper into that muscle, one thing I wanted to bring up was some of that sarcoplasmic reticulum, the transverse tubules. Those are important to us because that's how nutrients and fluids are processed throughout deep into those muscles. So that's how we're going to influence nutrient delivery. And also, actually, there's a theory that has been It is a theory. Some science has proven it. Some other parties sort of disagree. But if you believe in sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, then one option for hypertrophy is actually go in and fill that sarcoplasmic reticulum full of nutrients and fluids and actually stretch it from the inside out. And then that would actually have an influence on growing our muscle size. Sort of a non-functional adaptation, but an adaptation I just want to bring up really quickly. Nonetheless, something we'll end up touching on later on down the road. Also keep in mind that the mitochondria, our slow twitch muscle fibers, are richer in mitochondria. And when we train for endurance and challenge our bodies for endurance, one of the adaptations from that stimulus is to increase the number of mitochondria in the muscle. And mitochondria helps us produce more energy. So looking at our muscles here, this is a pretty basic chart, but it shows us a lot of the common muscles that we'll be referring to. And if you're a professional or you want to be proficient with exercise training, you should know every exercise on this chart. There's not much fluff on this chart. There's no wasted space. We should know all of those muscles and the actions they perform. Today we will not be diving into each and every one of those, but some quick ones to remember would be, especially on the posterior figure on the right, that the back has multiple muscles back there. It's not just lats. There's also the rhomboids, the traps. So different poles have different muscle actions. And we'll dive into that more down the road, but I would say over teaching this material in the past, that's probably the number one thing that I run into with this specific chart or this batch of muscles, is that a lot of beginners or young coaches are thinking that sort of any pull or row hits the lats. And that's easy to think because the lats are essentially the biggest muscle on our back, but they're not the only muscle on our back. Keep in mind, make sure you know some of the simple movements, or some of the simple muscles, like where our glutes are, those are our butt cheeks. Hamstrings are the thigh muscle on our posterior, and quadriceps are our thigh muscle on the anterior. With our core muscles, I can spend much time on this. Make a couple of quick notes and we'll move on. First note I want to make sure that we know is that our abs, our six-pack, that rectus abdominis that's out front, that's not the most functional muscle in our core. It is important and it's a stabilizer, and we like that about it. And it also it can be good looking if we get lean enough. Then we can grow it into maybe a 6-pack or a 4-pack or a 12-pack. That kind of depends on your genetics. You're not going to do extra core work to get yourself a couple of extra numbers in your pack, but we can talk about that at a later time. But just remember that rectus abdominis that's out front, that helps us create that pretty looking 6-pack out front, hopefully. But there's a lot of muscles in there. And you're not really going to care how good your stomach looks if you've got really bad back pain, or if you're in a sport and you're not succeeding, but you look really good. It kind of depends on what your goals are, but just keep in mind that we have a lot of muscles to focus on here, and that the crunches and the sit-ups are not going to do everything that we want to. Even though we feel it burning and really picking on our rectus abdominis, that muscle out front, that's not everything that we want to work on. And we'll get into more about what these muscles are going to do for us and how to boost the health of our lower back and our core. But to be looking at this now, make sure that we know these muscles, and we'll get into their functions down the road. So those were our muscles. If you are uncomfortable with it or don't know that material yet, maybe replay that section. And one thing that's worked for me is drawing it out. So make sure that you know your muscle actions. Again, you don't need to memorize the 600 plus muscles in the body, but the ones that we talked about today so far are very important for progressing forward. Okay, a little bit more on the nervous system. I was coaching and personal training for years, and I already had an undergrad degree, and I didn't know hardly anything about the nervous system. I took a motor learning class, but it just didn't touch on the things that I really find practical today. Some 12 years later, so that's a lot. That's a lot about what I'm trying to do in this program, is give you guys the information that I wish somebody would have told me. So the nervous system, you could have several semesters and you could get several degrees on just the nervous system. So we're going to touch on it a little bit here. Bare bones of it is that our central nervous system is our brain and also our spinal cord. But I really want you guys to start thinking about, because we're going to talk about this quite a bit, is the autonomic nervous system. So our autonomic nervous system is sort of it's like the backup software that keeps us going. Okay, so while I've been talking to you guys, I've never had to remind myself to breathe in, although I can do that consciously. I've never had to do that, or almost pass out if I didn't. I've never had to tell my heart to beat. I've never had to tell my stomach to digest the lunch that I ate. My autonomic nervous system just takes care of that. So it's what keeps our body running while our brain and our central nervous system maintain other functions. And what we'll get into a little bit more down the road, but again, we're going to talk about it here just a bit, is that the stress of what we do in the weight room and in life can affect our autonomic nervous system. And that can affect our digestion and our sleep and our heart rate and our heart rate variability. So just keep in mind that for total health, we want to not only be taking care of our muscles and picking on those, but we have to train intelligently and optimally if we want our autonomic nervous system to be working optimally. So if you're overtraining or pushing the body too hard, you might get some physical results. Maybe you gained or lost the weight that you wanted to gain or lose. Maybe you're lifting some heavier weights. But if you're starting to have trouble sleeping, having some gastrointestinal distress, whether that's bloating or irregular bowel movements, if your mood is unusual, or you're starting to find that you're a little bit grumpier than normal, or if you just find that you don't want to train anymore, something that you were super passionate about 2 or 3 weeks ago or a month ago, now you're just not really feeling it. Those are all great indicators that your autonomic nervous system is kind of on the fritz, which is okay. That happens, and there's a way to bring it back. Just like we can overdo it and put that autonomic nervous system in a stressful state, we can also do things to help usher it back into health. And I failed to mention that the autonomic nervous system can also, if we're getting sick a lot and picking up a lot of extra colds and headaches, that can also be an indicator that something's not quite right with our ANS, our autonomic nervous system. Okay, our vascular system. Short and sweet, our arteries take blood away from our heart. The arteries near our heart are big and thick. As they get further away and they branch out, kind of like just go outside and look at a tree. The branches near the trunk are thick, and as they get further away, they differentiate and deviate, and they get thinner and smaller. And that's what happens into the capillaries. And where those capillaries are, that's where nutrients cross from inside capillaries to inside tissues, and that's where biowaste can get picked up and taken out. and then it's taken out as those little capillaries rebranch into one another and form bigger channels. Then they become veins again. Our veins bring our blood back to our heart. So arteries take it away. They become capillaries, which are the small little vessels where the nutrients can actually pass across the tissue. And then our veins bring the blood back to us. Okay, getting into the skeleton here. From that image on the left, let's make sure that we know each of those items. They will come in handy in this program. Specifically, the humerus, the pelvis, and the clavicle. From the item on the right, let's be sure we know, we still need to know the clavicle and the humerus. Let's also make sure that we know the scapula. So that scapula is your shoulder blade. And those shoulder blades, we've got 2 of them. And each shoulder blade has 17 muscles that attach to it. And so the shoulder blade is sort of an unsung hero. It's not given the credit that it deserves with the importance of proper scapular action or inaction. But with 17 muscles attaching to each scapula, you guys got to understand, you got to believe that is important. We got to know what's going on back there. And we're not going to learn it all today, but just make sure that you know where that scapula is and that we have 17 muscles attaching to each scapula. Sticking with the skeletal system, make sure you know the pelvis, the patella, the femur, and the tibia. That fibula, we're not going to run into much information on that, so don't stress it. But we should know that pelvis. We're going to be referring to the pelvis a lot, especially how that pelvis should be sitting neutral, kind of like a bowl holding water. When the pelvis is unhappy or tilting one way or another, the water spills out of the bowl. That femur, we're going to refer to that again quite a bit, especially when we're talking about squatting. We'll be looking at the relationship of the femur to being parallel or not parallel. And that patella, that's our kneecap. We'll be looking at patellar tracking. Sometimes, because that patella is a floating bone, it's a sesamoid bone, one of 4. Your patella floats, and then we've got, I believe it's called a hyoid bone, is what makes up the men's Adam's apple. And then you've got a couple little sesamoid bones down in the bottom of your foot. Don't worry about those guys down there. Just focus on the patella. We're not going to be talking more about Adam's apples or anything like that. But we do need to know about that patella. And then our tibia is going to be important when we're talking about our shin angles and some biomechanics of different lifts. Looking at our spinal column. And now keep in mind, when we talked earlier, we were talking about how the central nervous system includes our brain and our spinal cord. And now we're jumping right back into that spinal cord there. So that's a hint. You know, we talked about the musculature of the core, we talked about the central nervous system, and now we've got an image on the spine. So it's important. And one thing that I'll say right now, and I'm going to say again, is that the spinal cord or lower back injuries are the number 2 reason people go to the doctor in the United States. Common cold is number 1, and low back injuries historically is number 2. And so we need to know about our spine and our pelvis and our hips and how to keep all that healthy. But a little bit more on the spine here. Let's take a look at our vertebrae on that image on the left. You have the cervical spine, the thoracic spine, and the lumbar spine. And one way, there's not going to be a test on this, but one way to easily remember a mnemonic device I like that I was given is to remember how many vertebrae are in each section of the spine. And somebody once said to me is that the cervical spine has 7, the thoracic spine has 12, and the lumbar spine has 5. And so what you can say and what you can tell yourself is that I eat breakfast at 7 a.m., lunch at noon, and dinner at 5. And for whatever reason, that works for me. But what I really want you guys to remember is that different parts of the spine have different responsibilities. With athletics or performance or even just feeling good, again, if you're not an athlete or if you're training non-athletes, nobody likes having lower back pain. That's why they go to the doctor. That's why it's the number 2 reason that people go to the doctor in the United States. So if we can prevent our own lower back pain or prevent our clients or our athletes' lower back pain, that's pretty big. That's important. If we can resolve it, even better. And I'll say that what we really want to focus on, make sure that you're remembering the thoracic spine, because we're going to come back to the thoracic spine time and again. And we're going to talk about the importance of that thoracic spine because that's where most of our mobility comes from. Cervical spine, not so much. Lumbar spine, it shouldn't be too much. With that thoracic spine, if we've got somebody swinging a baseball bat or a golf club or walking across the street and somebody yells their name out and they want to turn around and look over their shoulder, most of that rotation should be coming from the thoracic spine. If you've got a gymnast who's doing back bends or some really like unusual type of movement that demands a lot of spinal extension, most of that should be coming from the thoracic spine. So keep that in mind. We will revisit that and talk about it more down the road. Triple X, classic Vin Diesel movie, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about triple extension. Triple extension, if you look at our track sprinter there, triple extension is extension of the hip, the knee, and the ankle. And what helps us extend at the hip? It's going to be mostly glutes and hamstrings, although there's muscles in the lower back that are involved as well. And what helps us extend at the knee? That's going to be quadriceps. And what helps us extend at the ankle? That's going to be calves. And triple extension takes place in so many sports and so many activities of daily living. Let's just take a look here. So we've got our track sprinter. A lot of sports involve sprinting. We have our a fellow who looks like he's doing an Olympic weightlifting event with that little diagram there. He's extending hip, knee, and ankle. And Steph Curry's taking a jump shot. So when he pops up, what's helping him get up above that defender and release what's probably going to be a three-pointer? It's triple extension. We've got that fellow doing a prowler push down below. Triple extension. In fact, I love prowler pushes for training this. It's simple. It can be hard. It can be easy. You can use it for strength training, power training, hypertrophy work, conditioning, muscle endurance. You can, if coach says they want a mental toughness session, prowler is probably the easiest place to look. And then we also have a diagram of Michelle Wee taking her golf stroke on the bottom there. And you can see towards the bottom right there, as she rotates through and finishes that swing, she's got extension of the hip, the knee, and the ankle. This triple extension takes place in so many sports, maybe every sport. That training it is important, and knowing the anatomy and knowing how to safely apply some coaching is a big part of what we're going to do. Okay, we're going to finish up with some muscles versus movements. So again, coaching, we've got a little bit of art, a little bit of science, and it's up to you, or maybe you're not a coach, maybe you're just trying to take care of yourself. You got to understand, we are going to talk a lot about science in this program, but we're also going to talk about art and how to make a program that's appropriate. So, we don't all live in a laboratory. We can't all just do like the science-based program. And also, you don't necessarily just want to be like doing crazy stuff to put on your Instagram or whatever to show people how tough and rugged you are or whatever. So we want to have a happy mixture. So this is part of that art. So muscles versus movements. When coaches are training and picking exercises, doing their exercise selection, well, if you've got a basketball player, it makes sense that you might do some squatting to keep their legs strong. It makes sense that you might do some sprinting, some jumping, some running. But what about loaded jumps? Okay, you can load them in a bunch of different ways. You can load them, you can put a bar on their back, you can put weight in their hands, you can put cables around their ankles, you can, none of those are bad. But would you do a weighted jump shot? Would you use sort of like a cannonball or a bowling ball for them to be training their movement? Maybe. I'm not a basketball coach, so that's not my call. But you want to have some logic behind what you're doing. So if you want them to get stronger in the movement of shooting a basketball, well, you can break that down a little bit, and you can maybe look at their tricep strength. So instead of having them take a 20-pound medicine ball and do jump shots with it, which might cause some joint strain, or it may throw off the mechanics of their normal shot, maybe just go have them do a tricep exercise of your choosing. So there's pros and cons to both, and there's what you can pick. You can do resisted golf swings or tennis swings, or you can drag sleds for sprinting. There's so many options, but at some point, you should really know if you're training a movement more or muscles more. Because if I have a power lifter and I'm doing a squat in training, I'm probably training a movement. But if that power lifter feels like their core needs to get stronger, I'm going to go take them over and I might do a plank or some sort of anti-flexion movement. And with that, I'm going to be isolating and getting away from a big squat movement. I'm going to be isolating more, and maybe I'm training that muscle a little bit more. But because that muscle that I'm picking on is involved in the bigger movement, I'm still working towards my goal, even though I'm not squatting for a power lifter for 20 minutes of a workout or maybe for a whole day in the gym. Just because they perform those movements in their sport doesn't necessarily mean that they need to perform those movements in their training. If the muscles involved in the exercise apply to their sport or apply to some of the other training goals they have, then we're still being progressive and working towards our goals. And you always want to keep your goals in mind. The goal is to keep your goal the goal. And again, just remember, athletes and performers need movement proficiency, but that does not mean that every exercise needs to be movement-based. And when it comes to bodybuilders or recreational lifters, they may not care at all how much weight they move. It may be more about looking good or feeling good. And so these are some of the things that we take into account when we're thinking about muscles versus movements. Great, guys.